So you hear all the different names, right? Brazilian, Kenyan, Ethiopian, Sumatran, Colombian. Well, what do all these mean? I just know about the one I liked, the one someone else told me they liked, but I don't really know what the difference is or what I'm getting. Well, I thought it'd be good to break that down and explain it today. So let's go over some of the different ones. There's regions around the world. They all come from this area called the Coffee Belt, which is basically near the equator, which is the area where the best climates and conditions are for growing that type of plant, the coffee plant. There's a couple types. There's Robusta, Arabica. Arabica is the killer one. That's the one you like. Robusta, the one you get in little red canisters at the grocery store. Not really my cup of coffee. But what we're going for is Sumatran is going to be dry, woodsy, herbal, earthy, all these kind of profiles that you'll get like, is that driftwood? Is that moss? Is that tarragon? Is that cedar? Is that tobacco? These are some interesting flavors, right? They're real low, deep, earthy flavors. Create a lot of, I think of Sumatran almost like the subwoofer of the coffees. And on its own, I have people that are like, I have to have Sumatran. I bring them something else. Sumatran. Gotta have my Sumatran. Everybody has their coffee. That's one of those ones that you hear people say, I like the Sumatran when people talk about coffees from certain countries. And they do coffee a little different there. What they do is they do a wet hulling of the coffee. Wet hulling is where you actually pick the coffee, you depulp the fruit off the coffee. If you didn't know, coffee's a fruit. I talk about it in my other videos. And so then the coffee has a shell around the seeds, or what we call the beans. And so what they'll do is they'll take the hull off, which is the shell, off of the beans, and they'll dry the coffee a little bit, and they actually put it in the bag when it's still wet and sell it, which gives it a deeper, more musty kind of flavor. It also brings the acidity down, but it makes for a less clean cup. So what I'm into these days is getting one that's wet hulled originally to give that characteristic of the Sumatran, but then dried an additional time to clean the cup up so that it's not sitting in there and kind of getting that like fermented, musty, almost like a moldy profile in there. And you'll notice Sumatrans, if you're a roaster, you would notice that some of the beans aren't looking so hot. So it's good to get really select special Sumatrans that come directly from specific farms, whereas most Sumatrans are sold to market, and the market sells a mix of a lot of different coffees. So all these differences make a huge difference in your cup of coffee. And when you get a really clean one, you get that sweetness still out of it, but you get those other characteristics you expect from the Sumatran, the low acid, the tobacco notes, the cedar woody notes, those herbal notes that really add a lot of depth of character and give you something unique and different. And they're also great for mixing with other coffees so they can give that element to the other things to make it more well-rounded and fill it out more. Then we have Brazilian. Brazilian generally grown at a lower level, much like a Hawaiian coffee is another one that's popular. People know about Hawaiian. It's an expensive coffee generally, and it's grown in these huge plantations sometimes, and other times real small ones, the same as other countries. But they do mechanical harvesting in Brazil and Hawaii because they're on a more flat terrain that they grow in, and their kind of specific climate and conditions they have there. They're grown in full sun. Whereas these other countries, you're going to look for one that was grown under a shade canopy, which is going to help the plants ripen slower. And when they ripen slower, they're going to be denser. And the denser they are, the higher the quality is. And one of the grade qualities is called strictly hard bean, which means only the dense coffee beans are the ones they choose. And you can tell that because when the farmers pick them, they'll put them in water, and the really light ones will float to the top, and they'll skim those off. But there's a lot of different grading and sorting that goes on that's not as important to what we're talking about today. We can get into that on another video. But the difference we're talking about today is flavor profiles. So when it comes to Brazilian or Hawaiian, I only look for a hand-picked one. We're going to get all the perfect beans, right? And those flavors are going to be more nutty. I'd say nutty is the key characteristic in there. You're going to get a little hint of fruit like a dried raisin, but it's going to be more subtle, and little hints of spice, and definitely some chocolatiness that's really nice in the Brazilians and the Hawaiians too. But I prefer the Brazilians, honestly, because I feel like they have a little bit more depth of character and they're also a very low acid coffee. So when you're looking for low acid, I would say go Brazilian or Sumatran. Those are going to be your two top choices. There's other ones you could go for, like other island coffees in general are going to be low acid. But Brazilian and Sumatran are tops. Brazilian, I go to add nut character to my coffees, to add that classic like cup of coffee flavor, but a little bit different than the chocolatey ones or some of the other ones you might get. And it's really great for espresso. So Italians like to blend Brazilians into their espresso blends, and that'll be the base of the blend. Like half of the blend will be just the Brazilian natural process. And natural process means they leave the fruit on it to dry, or pulp natural process where they just take the peel off and they dry the pulp onto beans, which gives it a more depth, more intensity, and it also lowers the acidity. Okay. So then we have coffees like Colombian. Colombian's South American, North South American. It's got a lot of character to it as well. It's going to be a wet processed coffee almost always, which means they're going to take the fruit off right away and dry it clean. And you're going to get a wide range of what you can do with a Colombian. You can do some really dark roasts, but also there's some beautiful light roasts that have a lot of fruit character to them. So I would say when it comes to Colombian that you're going to get a lot more fruity notes in it. And anytime the different roast levels, it's going to go fruit, nut, chocolate, and spice. So the lower, lighter coffees are going to be generally, you're going to highlight more of the fruit notes in it because it was a fruit. So it's closer to its original characteristics. And the more roast you put into it, the more you're going to develop flavors that would come from roast, like some nut in the middle there when they're just toasted. You toast them just the same you would a nut, right? And then when you get to the dark roast, you're going to get to those more chocolatey, deeper flavors all the way up to like a real bitter chocolate. Another coffee that I love, if I had to choose my top three, it'd be Ethiopian, Brazilian, Guatemalan. So let's go over the Guatemalan and then we'll go over the Ethiopian. The Guatemalan, I'd say, is like awesome chocolatey coffee. And light roast, you're going to get some amazing fruit character in that too. But the most amazing thing about Guatemalan is it's super versatile. You could use it for almost anything, like any blend, any roast level, and it's super consistent. The conditions in Guatemala for growing coffee and the plants they use are just phenomenal. And you could talk to most any roaster and they're going to say the guat. People say guat, Guatemalan. And I have a lot of people that always have to have the guat, or they love certain blends I do that have the guat in them. And the guat is like a backbone or like a Cabernet of coffees. It's just solid. It's crowd pleasing. It's full, but it's still complex. It's just, I can't say enough good things about the guat. Another one I would try is Ethiopian. If you want something that's the most beautiful, most delicate, most nuanced, most complex coffee you can get, you really can't beat Ethiopian. And the main reason is Ethiopian is where Arabica was discovered. So they're all heirloom varietals there, which means you go to a coffee farmer's plantation and he's going to have plants that show different characteristics, different colored fruit, different size fruit, different looking trees with different looking leaves, a little bit of these subtle characteristics. And when you put them together, they make it their own amazing blend, but it's all natural blend. It's not like you're taking different coffees from around the world and mixing them. They're in the same, they're right next to each other growing. It's really beautiful and amazing. And the flavors are so complex because there's more genetic diversity there, based on the fact that most of the coffees around the world were from plants taken from there and copied over and over and over the same plant. So you're going to get a lot of the same thing, just like with apple varietals. So, you're going to have your Red Delicious and it's going to be more waxy. You're going to have your Braeburn or all your different apple varietals. You could think of coffee fruit the same way. And then you can also take it another step in the drying method because of the way, like I mentioned, the Sumatrans, they do the wet hulling. Then you could do a natural process where you dry the fruit on it. You could do a pulp natural or honey process where you dry just the pulp on it with no skin, or you could do a wet process. Then there's the drying tables, and you can do a drying table with solid wood inside of a plastic lined, almost like a greenhouse, or you could do out in open sun with mesh. So there's air breathing under it with hand tossing every hour. There's all different ways you can do it, create different profiles. And the Ethiopian is one where the men pick it generally and the women hand toss it every hour on the mesh tables. And you will see that they'll do both methods natural, and wet process, which will create completely different flavor profiles. And there's a couple regions in Ethiopia that are awesome. Harar is like a real legendary region. They're known for their natural processed coffees. So you'll see them laid out on the tables and they'll be like purple after they dried. Before they dried, they'll be like a bright red raspberry. And then when they depulp that off and you roast it, you get super deep, really deep dark fruit flavors and chocolate, sweetness, depth of character, complexity, even at light roast. I'll take my natural processed coffees and I'll roast them light, and I get dark roast lovers that love them all day long. They don't understand what it is, but they know that it's got that fullness they're looking for in the coffee, which is generally what people are used to when they like dark roast coffees. They want something that seems thick and full. You're going to get that from those natural coffees from Ethiopia, from Brazil. I have a great one from Guatemala right now, like I mentioned with the Guat. So I'll have a couple Guatemalans at a time and a couple Ethiopians. And the Ethiopian is like top notch. You go to the light roast ones, they're going to be like fruity, apricot-y, floral, spiced. I would say floral, tea, and fruit notes are going to be your number 3. And specifically pit or stone fruit notes, like the orangish kind of pit fruits, you know, apricot. It's my fave. And then like a Earl Grey tea or a lilac, floral. It could be all different. Jasmine. I get some awesome ones. And then the natural process from Ethiopian is going to be like berries. And then the darker you roast it, it's going to change character. So it'll go from like a light strawberry note and then goes into like a deeper raspberry note. And then when you get really to the darker levels, it's going to be like a blueberry that's chocolate covered. And that just like is one of the most noticeable flavors in coffee is from a natural process Ethiopian. You will be like, wow, you can't deny the fruit in that cup. I mean, you'd have to have no taste buds not to notice. So that one, if you want to try something really different, Ethiopian natural process, boom, knocks your socks off. If you're expecting no fruit at all in coffee, you're going to pretty much have to stay away from light roast or natural processed coffees in general. I wouldn't say that about the Ethiopian the Brazilian, because the Brazilian natural process is going to definitely be more of a nutty, chocolatey character, but you will get some little dried fruit notes in it. Another one that people talk about all the time is Kenyan, and it's revered for its acidity. And people say, oh, I want low acid coffees, but when coffees are tested, they're tested for acidity as a really special attribute of the coffee because it gives it that brightness, that zing that opens it up like a flower blooming and just makes it go, woo, beautiful. So that's one thing to look for when you're tasting a coffee too, is a little bit of a height and low crescendo in the coffee when you taste it. When it's just like flat, you know, it's not very exciting. But another thing I look for is a little natural sweetness, smoothness, and cleanness. Not like a murky or bitter or dull flavor in the coffee. And you're going to get that also by the way you brew it, which you can see about in my other videos. But the Kenyan, it's got this purple kind of hue in my mind when I think of Kenyan. It's got fruits like currant, cassis, those kind of purplish fruit notes to it a lot of times. Sometimes it will have some amazing citrus notes too, like orange or lemon, but you're definitely going to be more in the realm of fruit and spice when you do Kenyans. And I've had some really dark roasted ones and you can still taste a little bit of that fruit in the background. It's definitely not a more chocolatey or nutty coffee. It's definitely a more fruited one with some spice in it, especially if you go deeper in the roast. But that's not the kind of coffee I'd recommend going deep in the roast with. For one thing, it's very expensive, and then you're masking it just with roast character, which is like a known secret in the industry, is that the consumer doesn't realize that the higher the quality of the coffee, the less you need to roast it to make it taste beautiful, and that the lower the grade of the coffee, the more you need to roast it to mask all its defects. And there's lots of defects in coffee. But today we're talking more about the flavor profile. So we've gone over Kenyan, Colombian, Sumatran, Guatemalan, Brazilian, Ethiopian. What other ones would we think of for coffee? Well, we talked about Hawaiian, right? Maybe we would talk about El Salvadorian, which is going to be a really good chocolatey one, or Nicaraguan, which will be a really nice nutty one. So there you go. We talked about some basic different countries. We broke it down a little bit on the flavors. Now you have more of an idea when you go to choose a coffee what you should get. So If you liked the video and you'd like to see more stuff, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Also hit the bell notifications button so you can always be notified when I put up a new post. I'm Ted Jones, owner of Riverview Coffee Roasters, and I'll see you on the next one.